This afternoon and this morning, I received countless texts and emails from other colleague bishops and pastors and leaders across our church who were energized and delighted by the presentation by you, Dr. Jennings, this morning. And so we're just really grateful that we have another opportunity to hear from you for your keynote address. And so I will reintroduce to the assembly Dr. Willie Jennings. Thank you, Dr. Jennings.
My dear friends, it is such a joy to continue this time with you today. Listening to what's been going on, I really wish I was there. So I hope that at some point in time, you will invite me to come and we can share meals together and I can actually get to see your faces in person. But let me thank the bishop and his wonderful team for this invitation to come and spend this time with you. It has been a joy. In my second presentation, I'd like to offer a bit of a meditation on one crucial idea: seeing the world as Christians, seeing the world as Christians. What does it mean to see the world as Christians? This is a crucial and urgent question, my friends, for us today, because so many people are looking at a Christianity that they find at least disturbing or at most destructive, and in almost all cases, in no way compelling. At this moment, the very character of our witness as Christians is at stake, because at this moment, we are beginning to feel the full weight of the legacy of a Christianity that performs and enacts what I call racial faith. Racial faith is a life of faith governed and guided by one's racial and cultural sense of belonging. In the long history of Christianity in the Western world, and especially this country, our sense of racial belonging has always been more powerful, more compelling, and sadly far more decisive than our sense of Christian belonging. At the root of racial faith is a distorted way of seeing the world that we Christians created, cultivated, and passed on to generations of people here all over the world. That distorted way of seeing the world has three abiding elements: a distorted way of seeing our salvation, a distorted way of seeing the earth, and a distorted way of seeing our witness. A distorted way of seeing our salvation, a distorted way of seeing the earth, and a distorted way of seeing our witness. So in my time this afternoon, I would like to outline what it means for us to see the world as Christians. It begins with how we see our salvation. It begins with seeing our salvation as Gentiles. We, my friends, we have entered the story of another people, Israel. And in this way, come to know our God as and is the God of Israel. Think especially of Acts 10. I mentioned this morning in the Bible study. Think especially of Acts 10, where Peter is confronted with the new that God is bringing in the world and to the world. Peter is on that rooftop praying and falls into a dream, some say a trance, and in that dream, God lowers a sheet filled with animals that no faithful Jewish believer would dare touch, let alone eat. But God says to Peter, rise, kill, and eat. As you all know in the passage, a struggle ensues, a struggle follows. And the truth of the matter is that we Gentiles, we are the animals on that sheet. God was opening Israel through Peter, opening Israel to a new way of life with Gentiles, and opening Gentiles to a new way of life with Israel in their story. We were the guests entering the home of another. We were those at the margins, and that's a crucial word to keep in mind, my friends. We were at the margins, and it was from the margins that we came to understand ourselves as recipients of God's grace. So Gentile Christians formed as those who presented to Israel two profound questions. What do we do? What do we do with these Gentiles who now worship our God and are coming to love our deliverer, Jesus, who is also now their deliverer? What do we do with these Gentiles who are now filled with the same Spirit of God that fills us with divine light and life? We were the surprise of love. Those who understood what it was like to be outsider, stranger, alien, and at the margin, and who from the margins experienced grace and new life together with Israel and with others who would be followers of this Jesus. Now, friends, let me be clear. There are many Christians who never really got that memo I just said. They never really got that memo. They really never actually heard the story of their faith. That we are those who have entered into the story of another people, joined another people, so that entering through love and for the sake of love is our way. That's our way. Joining people in humility and thankfulness, remembering what it's like to be on the margins, is our way. Now, somewhere in the history of Christianity and of the church, we got tired of hearing and telling that story. We decided that we were no longer the guests entering another story. We decided that we were the host, and Israel, Jewish people, were the guests. We decided that we were the chosen, and they were not. We knew God. They did not. We held the truth. They would not. We were the focus of God's attention. They no longer were. This Gentile hubris or pride grew inside all sectors of the church and in the places that we would now call Europe, and in all the peoples we would now call European, and all the nations that formed, and the vision of nationalism that formed with it. Christians imagined that they replaced Israel as the center of the story of God and thereby became the center of God's concern, God's plan, and God's actions in the world. This is what we mean by centered existence, as it's often used these days. To believe that what God is doing in the world revolves around us. So gone is the idea of a faith born at the margins, shaped in humility, and ready to enter and join others for the sake of love. And in its place is a prideful faith that imagines life from the center. This, my friends, is the ground and the seed that gives life to racial faith, and especially whiteness. So before I go on further, let me explain what I mean by whiteness, because for so many people to even say the word whiteness brings stress and fear. And for some to even say the word whiteness already borders on hate speech. But to speak of whiteness is to speak of a historical process of identity reconstruction. Whiteness is not phenotype. not first appearance or biology or culture, and certainly not a part of God's creation. Whiteness is a way of seeing the world and a way of being in the world at the same time. Whiteness is a way of organizing the world, making sense of the world. And whiteness is having the power to order one's world by that effort. Again, having the power to order one's world by that effort. Whiteness, in that regard, is an invitation and a quest to embody a life of control, possession, and mastery. To embody a life of control, possession, and mastery. Whiteness creates a distorted way of seeing one's salvation. Whiteness invites us to see ourselves as the host, inviting others to join us, to see ourselves at the center of God's concern and God's will for the world, and others needing to align with us. But to see our salvation as Gentiles is to see ourselves as those who sense and know what it means, what it feels like to be at the margins, what it feels like to be an outsider, an alien, a foreigner, and to know what grace means. We have entered and joined the way of life of another people, and in so doing, to make possible a new way of living together. So entering in and joining is our way of life. It is the way we begin to see life as Christians. Which brings me to the second distorted element, the distorted way of seeing the earth. Tragically, when early Europeans came to the New Worlds, they brought that distorted view of their salvation, and with it formed a distorted view of the earth and the peoples of the earth. Those early European Christians looked out on the New Worlds and imagined that God had ordained them to take possession of this world. And possession, my friends, is the key word here. These Christian colonialists, let's call them that because that's what they were. These Christian colonialists saw possession through break, separation, and enclosure. Break, separation, and enclosure. Native groups that they encountered saw possession through continuum, connection, and overlap. They understood themselves to be possessed by land and animal, water and plant. For them, their possession of followed from their sense of being possessed by. For these Christians coming to take this land, they understood their possession by to be sanctioned by God, full stop. Because they had come to believe that to cultivate a place, to cultivate land, gave them the right of possession. Ironically, Native peoples gave witness more clearly to a biblical sensibility than Christian colonialists had, the ones that they had abandoned in the feverish greed of possession. That sensibility in ancient biblical Israel meant that the people of God always understood that the land itself and the animals watched them, monitoring their faithfulness to God and their covenantal consistency. Ancient Israel knew that they were possessed by God and possessed by the gaze of the ground, the plants and the animals, the mountains and the trees that watched and reacted to their actions. As Leviticus 18:24 and following says, that if Israel visited its iniquity upon the land and the animals. The earth itself would vomit them out, as it had vomited out the people that were there before them. God made covenant not only with the people, but with the land itself. God remembers the people and God remembers the land itself. So says Leviticus 26. Israel understood that it was possessed on two sides. God on the one side, announcing divine claim, and the land itself on the other side, echoing that claim, pressing that claim through every bite of food, every drink of water, and every deep breath taken in. This sensibility drowned in the colonial waters as European Christians settled into new worlds with a new, profoundly distorted understanding of possession. Now, my friends, we yet live in a distorted vision of possession, one rooted in isolated and isolating visions of ownership. Our lives are shaped by the property line that divides our concerns and cares to what we own. We are connected by the land and the water, the dirt and the sky. We share the world with plant and animal kin. Yet most of us live without a healthy sense of connectivity. And without a healthy sense of connectivity, the way we relate will always lack the depth that gives witness to the life together that God wants for us and with us. What it means for us to see the world as Christians is to see ourselves joined with our co-creatures, and therefore to live our lives against the line, to live our lives against the line, against boundary and border, and to live toward an ever-expanding reality of communion and life together. We live against isolation and segregation. We live against a vision of productivity that turns the land and animals and everything into objects, to commodities. Against that isolation and segregation, the kind that runs from the body to the land, from our states of mind to our nation states, from how we think to the places we inhabit. This then brings me to the third distorted element, and that is the distorted way of seeing our witness. We give witness to a God who became flesh and entered the way of the creature. My goodness. Jesus of Nazareth is God living the life of the creatures. As Irenaeus said, Jesus is God entering the contours of the creature. And in this way, shows a God learning. A learning God makes no sense unless we see a God joyfully entering into the space and time of this God's own creation. In Jesus, God learns and gives witness to life from the inside. It is from the inside as a learner that God is revealed. I'll say that again. It is from the inside as a learner that God is revealed. And it remains a profound challenge for Christians to understand the way of our witness in relation to this truth. You see, we are the inheritors of a legacy I have called pedagogical imperialism. Pedagogical imperialism. That colonial legacy we yet inhabit taught us that only a talking, teaching, evaluating, judging Christian is one who is giving witness to God. This is the legacy within which whiteness formed its vision of the world, whereby the whole world was imagined by the colonial Christian.
Be real calm, just pet her real gentle.
I think somebody has their speaker on, in which the whole
Don't most supervillains in movies do this?
So as I was saying, this is the legacy within which whiteness formed its vision of the world, whereby the whole world was imagined by the colonial Christian and their progeny as needing always and forever to be student, to be taught, and the Christian as always and forever to be the teacher. It is that pedagogical imperialism that rests powerfully inside whiteness, driving people to imagine themselves always at the center. This legacy denies to us the deepest legacy, the deepest truth of our witness. We give witness to a God found in the listening and the learning. We give witness to a God found in the listening and the learning. Jesus listened and learned before he taught. He listened and learned from the wisdom of his people and their way with the land and the animals. He also listened and learned from the way of the land and seed and dirt and water and birds and plants, and learned the importance of story because he lived the story of his people, the story of the land, and the story of God. Christians give witness to our God and the way of love of this God through the listening and the learning. But is there speaking, Dr. Jennings? Well, of course there is speaking. There is speaking. And of course there is teaching. But it begins with a productive silence. It begins with a productive silence, one that emerges after we have said those words, those wonderful words. Teach me your ways. Show me your world so that I might be with you. Teach me your ways. Show me your world so that I might be with you. We say these words first to God. And then we should say those same words to those to whom God has called us to give witness, to our neighbors near and far. And then what comes next? Then we listen and we learn from them. And in this way, the witness begins. But now let me be clear. We are listening and learning not as a social ploy or a missional strategy, but as a way of life that turns us toward love and life together and a joining that will change us. Draw us into a new way of life with others. To see our salvation as Gentiles, to see ourselves as joined to our co-creatures, and to see ourselves as listening learners is what it means to see our world as Christians, which means it is what it means to see our world as that which God has never ceased to love and yet calls us to love even more. Thank you very much. It has been a joy to spend this time with you.
Thank you, Dr. Jennings. And I look forward to having that meal with you at some point, perhaps a future assembly or perhaps on a visit out to Yale out east. I want to thank you so much for your words to us this afternoon and this morning. As one who's been a part of that, of the legacy of whiteness, just really awakening to the challenge of to reconstruct my own Christian imagination in a way that is faithful to our deep roots as Gentile Christians and not corrupted by much of the oppression of these intervening centuries. And so I'm so grateful for your witness in our church, for your teaching, and for your providing your witness to us here today. and look forward to working with you again in the future. God's peace be with you, my brother. Take care.